Apparently, Finders Keepers, the second book in the Bill Hodges trilogy, wasn't even supposed to be a sequel. It was supposed to be its own standalone story that was basically thrust into the Bill Hodges multiverse because I guess King couldn't figure out how to advance the plot. I'm not actually 100% sure if this is true. I've just seen a bunch of like comments about it, but it's funny that people are saying that because it's a thought that I actually had a lot of times myself while reading this book. Even if it's not actually true, it is just a very easy conclusion to draw given how like totally disconnected it is from the original Mr. Mercedes book. Just to give a brief summary of the plot here, it opens up in 1978 with a man named Morris Bellamy breaking into the house and subsequently murdering famous author John Rothstein in order to, one, steal his cachet of unreleased books, but two, to avenge Jimmy Gold, who's the main protagonist in this fictional author's most popular book series. Morris Bellamy feels that this character had an unsatisfying end to his character arc. He doesn't like the way things turned out in the book series, and he's mad about that, so he decides to kill him. I will say this whole thematic idea of the relationship between fans of a work and its author and how complicated and weird that is. It has a lot of shades of Misery to me, where Annie Wilkes is super upset with how Paul Sheldon is treating the character of Misery Chastain, and it's Stephen King's commentary on the relationship between the author and the audience, and it's always interesting coming from Stephen King, who's one of the most prolific authors in the world. It's always kind of fun hearing his perspective on that sort of thing. But anyway, Morris buries the books and a little bit of money in a chest near his childhood home, and then he gets arrested and put in jail for 36 years for just a totally separate, unrelated crime. And when he gets out, he learns that this entire stash of unreleased books and money has actually been discovered by a local boy named Peter Saubers, who coincidentally happens to live in the exact same house as Morris's childhood home. At first, Pete's main motivation is just the money. He doesn't really care about the books. He's trying to use the money to help his parents, who are extremely financially struggling right now because his dad was actually involved in the city center massacre. He didn't get killed, obviously, but he got extremely injured. They have a lot of medical debt, so Peter is basically using this money he discovered in a chest in the woods and anonymously donating it to his parents every week to help out with bills and the recovery and stuff like that. Once the money runs dry, though, that's when he starts kind of turning an eye towards the books and considering maybe selling them for a profit. And at the same time as that, he ends up reading the books and becoming a huge fan of John Rothstein's work, Jimmy Gold, the entire Jimmy Gold book series. And that's kind of where the crux of the plot is for this book. You have basically another cat and mouse game, kind of similar to Mr. Mercedes in its atmosphere, but this time it's Peter Saubers, Morris Bellamy, and Andy Halliday, this crooked book dealer that Pete is trying to sell to. It's this whole frenzy of blackmail and anxiety, and it once again leads to a very entertaining, very fast-paced, edge-of-your-seat crime thriller. I think the reason that I, and apparently other people, think that it could have worked as a standalone novel unrelated to the Bill Hodges stuff was that for half the book, that's exactly what it is. Hodges and Holly and Jerome and all the main characters from the first book don't even show up until like halfway through, maybe even a little bit later than that. And when they do show up, their role is kind of secondary to the main plot, which is still the Peter Saubers, Morris Bellamy thing. I guess King figured that if the authorities need to get involved with this whole book situation in some way, that it might as well be Hodges and Co. because it's, again, like a similar atmosphere and their thing is solving crimes now, so it was convenient to get them involved, and the story fits nicely into the hard-boiled crime detective noir thing that Mr. Mercedes had going for it. I guess all he really had to do is retrofit the setting to be Ohio and add in some city center massacre stuff, and bam, you got a sequel here. And by the way, I don't mean for that to come off in any sort of disparaging way. I actually think this book is really good. I think it's kind of tentative connection to the first book actually works in its favor a lot of the time. I mentioned in my Mr. Mercedes review that I thought Bill Hodges was a somewhat uncompelling protagonist, and I still think that to some degree, but I will say that the qualities I do like about him, like his kind of snarkiness and his like grumpy old manedness, they work better for me in smaller doses, I think. So I did kind of appreciate his new role in this book as like grumpy side cop or whatever. I actually might prefer him as a secondary character as opposed to the main protagonist of the entire book. But yeah, I don't have much more to say. I think the way this book is built is great. Once again, it's a page burner, crime thriller, super entertaining, super fast read. I actually read this one even faster than I read Mr. Mercedes, and like I mentioned in that, I am a slow reader, so it is impressive the amount of time it's taken me to read these things. It's extremely suspenseful. It has that classic King meta commentary on the relationship between the author and the writer. He loves exploring that sort of thing, like I mentioned earlier, and he does a great job with it again here. He obviously has a lot of thoughts about his relationship with his audience, so it's fun seeing that manifest itself in the characters of a story. I thought it was interesting how Peter Saubers and Maurice Bellamy, the protagonist and antagonist, were almost written as parallel figures in terms of their relationship with John Rothstein's work as fans. The same obsession got them into the same mess with each other on opposite sides, and the knot can really only be untied with them confronting each other. So the whole book is this kind of inexorable drawing of the two of them together. You know that it's going to end in some sort of conflict, and it just adds a lot of suspense throughout the whole thing. And yeah, it's just a really satisfying book. It's really tightly written. Nothing that's like completely blowing my mind or anything, but I am still very excited to see where he takes the series from here, especially with King's not so discreet hints at some type of looming supernatural element that may or may not come more into focus with the third book in the trilogy. But we'll have to wait and see. If it's anything like the page turner of the first two books in the series, it probably won't be very long from now until I'm talking about it. I will give this book 8 treasure chests out of 10.